Hello, my name is Adam Neely, and welcome to Question and Answer Time. I'm here answering all of your questions about bass and music in general, so let's get started.
Question and Answer Time with
What are things guitarists, especially ones that play a lot of lead, can do to make life easier for other musicians? I've always been overly aware of my relative volume. Usually people have to tell me to turn up, and to trying to play with some restraint. But are there qualities you've noticed that you've really appreciated or wish they would avoid?
So the big thing with guitarists seems to be volume. A lot of guitarists are too loud, but a lot of guitarists are aware that the other guitarists are too loud, so they turn down too much and overcorrect. So I think finding the right volume is very important if you're a guitar player. The other thing that I will definitely say about guitar is getting the right tone. A bad guitar tone can really ruin the whole sound of a band because most of the harmonic spectrum in a lot of bands and a lot of music is taken up by the guitar tone. And if it isn't really good or really well thought out, it can really put a damper on things, unfortunately.
Hey Adam, I've recently started to learn music theory, in part because of things I've heard on this channel. I found myself constantly asking, how can I break this? Or how can I bend this beyond reason? Would you say that this is a healthy mindset, or should I just focus on learning how to apply music theory in a normal way? Cheers in advance for any response.
So yeah, I do understand the sort of trepidation that a lot of people might have when they're first learning music theory in trying to stick to all of the rules, because it might feel really cramped and you just don't really want to feel like you're being restricted to a certain set of guidelines. But think about it this way. Let's think about music as a language, and let's think about learning a foreign language. If you're just learning a foreign language, would you feel constrained and boxed in when you're learning the rules of conjugations of verbs? No, it would be kind of ridiculous to try and break them from the get-go. And it's not necessarily something that you won't eventually be able to break, because I can break the rules of the English language and make sense in an artistic sense. For example, if I talked like this, me talk, bad caveman, bad, grunt, That statement in itself makes absolutely no sense in the rules of English, but I used English and deconstructed it to create a very particular sort of mood and sort of scene in this sort of performance that I gave you, I guess. That's the sort of thing when you're breaking the rules of music theory that you should think about, but only after you've mastered the rules of music theory can you even think about breaking them in that sort of sense, if you're approaching it from that sort of standpoint. I know it's hard, I know it's boring, but at a certain point you will master these rules to the point where you can do the caveman bash talk, I guess, if that makes any sense. I don't know, that analogy was a little far out, but you get what I'm talking about, right? Okay.
But I got a better question for professional musicians. What is the state of mind of a musician that plays long and intricate pieces from memory? What goes on in your brain? Is it like you store every note in your brain, or your instrument is like an extension of your body, just like a singer can use their voice as an instrument?
Here we go with the language analogy again. Have you ever memorized anything like a speech, or better yet, have you ever performed in a play where you have to memorize lines? It kind of goes the same way when you're memorizing a large piece of music. You don't really have to keep the entire thing in your head at any given time. Rather, you're mainly worried just about keeping the flow of everything going and worried about what you're performing at any given time and then what comes next after that. So you say your line, blah, 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 oh, this line logically follows from that. And then the next line logically follows from that. The same thing when you're performing a piece of music. And our memory is really good, generally as humans, our memory is really good at connecting things linearly and memorizing things that way. That's usually what I think about and how I compartmentalize everything in memorizing lots of music.
Thanks for being one of the best music/theory/bass content creators on YouTube. Even if about half of your content is above my musical knowledge level, I still enjoy educating myself and trying to apply what I can. I have one question and one critical, constructive I hope, comment. 1. I feel like I hear/see many musicians insist that the tone is in the hands. Obviously I know where they're coming from and they're not wrong. Your playing is only as good as your hands can make it, aka practice, but your gear certainly plays some part, and I don't know that it's completely honest to ignore it. It irks me, probably unreasonably so, when I hear people say that phrase. A Rickenbacker with steel round wounds played with a pick just isn't going to sound the same as a P-bass with flat ones played with your fingers, no matter how much tone is in your hands. Is it somewhere in the middle like I think it is, or am I just missing the point completely?
Yes, of course, tone is not entirely in the hands, that's ridiculous, but that phrase is mainly used to combat the mindset, at least I think it's used to combat the mindset of certain people who think, if I get this piece of gear, I will sound this much better. My tone's gonna be this more amazing. And I think that can be kind of toxic. A lot of people will really obsess over gear without really learning the technique and really learning the tone production that comes from actually playing it. If you have the experience with creating a good, solid, fundamental tone, you can get an amazing sound out of a cheap bass. So yes, of course, the tone is not entirely in the hands, but it is very, very important, and you should really focus on that rather than focus on gear, at least when you're first starting.
I've noticed in your Q&As that when you read a question or comment with typos, you enunciate the typo rather than saying the intended word. For trolls and jerks, I'm 100% behind this practice, but when it is an earnest question or comment by a fan, it comes across as unnecessarily mean.
I do apologize about that. I think I'm just being cheeky and fun, but yeah, it might come across a little bit mean-spirited. mean-spirited, so I will not do that unless I'm intentionally making fun of the person commenting.
Hey Adam, I recommend Sean and Polyphia in the unlikely case that you're not familiar with them yet. Here's a question. Mark Twain wrote that he loved being a steamboat navigator, but that after learning the trade, he no longer viewed the river with the same mystery and wonder as he had before. For someone as well versed in music theory as you are, is there a similar effect? Does this knowledge, as useful as it is, come at a price?
Man, that is an interesting topic, and I could definitely go on and on about it, but I will say this. Yeah, I definitely agree with Mark Twain in that sense, the awe and grandeur and the mystery and the naivete about something that you then go on and study. It kind of gets lost once you've studied it and really grappled with it on a deep intellectual and emotional level. The thing though is that I still can definitely be emotionally moved by music. I am on a regular basis because I try and make a conscious effort to not let the intellectual understanding of the music callous myself to the emotional truth of the music. And that's something that I try and approach all art and beauty with. Because the more I learn about things, the less that I have that naivete. And I think there's a romanticism of that naivete, that understanding of the awe and the grandeur. Oh, what is it? I don't even know. It's amazing. And that's great. That's fantastic because that gets you inspired to learn more and make it a part of you and part of your truth. But, you know, I can still open a book, read it, and be deeply moved by it, even if I don't kind of understand the whole nitty-gritty of the narrative structure and like the literary theory and all that. But if I did understand the literary theory, I would probably enjoy that book just as much, now with a deeper understanding of that book. So those are my thoughts on it. It's complicated.
Wow, what a great video. It might be also a good exercise to write down what you feel when different musicians play the same piece. It can sound very different.
I think that's a really fun thing about listening to recordings of classical music, because you can listen to the same piece twice in two different recordings and it will sound and feel radically different. There's so much that you can convey emotionally and musically by shaping lines differently. And you know, there's this emphasis among a lot of people that people like to think that musicians must be composers or must be improvisers, otherwise they aren't true musicians, they're just performers. You know, notes are like nothing. Anybody can write notes. That's just like not even a thing. That's not even, you can't really get to any core emotional truth just by writing down notes on a piece of paper. It's how you shape a line, how you shape a piece of music, how you put your own personality on music, how you put your own personality on the notes that other people might have written. That really makes you a musician.
You say that the pitch of the voice doesn't affect the vocoder. Find that singing the exact pitches that you're playing creates a richer fundamental tone and sounds more musical, at least with Ableton's vocoder.
You know, I actually haven't really found that to be true. In fact, one time I was actually given a piece of advice that you're supposed to sing the same pitch the entire way through as the synthesizer or the bass or whatever you're playing is changing the pitch. And that might help. The big thing that I found that has helped for me the most is compressing the hell out of your vocal signal before it actually hits the vocoder. That way, the vocoder has a very full, fat sound to work with a really strong fundamental pitch. And I think that really is going to be the best way of getting a really strong vocoder sound.
Hey Adam, really enjoying your videos. I'm wondering what MIDI controller you use in this video and some other videos as well, because I don't have keys that are mechanical and I think full E-piano are a bit expensive. Also, what piano VST is that? Greetings from Joshua, pianist from Germany.
I use the VMK 176 Plus, and it's a rather strange MIDI controller. There's a lot of weird glitchy things about it, but I do like the fact that it is weighted, which means that the keys actually feel like a real piano, so it doesn't feel super plasticky, so you can get some real nuance and emotion in it. The other thing is I like the fact that it is 76 keys. I find 88 keys is too much for most circumstances, but 61 keys is like too little. So 76 keys is really hard to find a weighted keyboard that has 76 keys, and this was like the only one that I was able to find. The sounds that I use for most things just come from MainStage. I use MainStage for basically everything. It is incredibly cheap for what you get, so if you're ever interested in using keyboard sounds and MIDI sounds, definitely get MainStage.
So what's the difference between this and a Talkbox?
So a Talkbox is a little bit different, although the musical effect is more or less the same. With a Talkbox, what you have is a physical tube that goes up through the Talkbox unit into your mouth, and out the tube comes the sound of the guitar, whatever it is you're talkboxing, and then you can control the formant frequencies and everything of that sound with your actual mouth like this, wow, wow, wow. And a fun experiment that you can do is you can take your cell phone and you can play music, and I have this piano app right here, and you can stick the speaker inside your mouth and you can kind of get this talkboxy effect. Looks totally hilarious, but that's essentially what's going on with a Talkbox. Now, the confusing thing is that a Talkbox sort of sounds like a vocoder, and it also kind of looks like a vocoder too when people are talkboxing, because you actually need a microphone in front of your face to pick up the sound. So, you know, the same way that you need to run your sound through a vocoder, you need to record your sound or amplify your sound with a microphone in front of your face. So it can be a little confusing, but the actual end effect is more or less the same. It's kind of like the sound of a fretted, distorted electric violin when you compare it to the sound of an electric guitar, distorted electric guitar. It sounds pretty much exactly the same, but the means of creating the sound is very different.
How does the Fibonacci sequence apply to music? I've heard some people talk about it, but all I've seen on the internet is stuff like the piano having 8 white keys and 5 black keys in an octave, which isn't even true, and it also completely ignores other instruments.
Now, as aesthetic as it may be, the Fibonacci sequence does not appear everywhere in music, because a lot of people like to try and force that sort of like, oh my god, if it's not the golden spiral and the golden ratio, it's not worth my time. It needs to be that. It needs to be the most aesthetically pleasing. The one place that I have noticed the Fibonacci sequence in music a lot of the time is kind of where you place and where composers place the climax of a piece of music in terms of the climax of a long scale, like classical composition, for example. So a good example of this is Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings, where the main climax happens, the main release happens about 5/8 the way through, thus adhering to your aesthetic Fibonacci sequence, whatever. And I like to think about that a lot of the time because that normally makes the most sense about where to place the most triumphant big part of a piece of music. And it's a very formalistic sort of understanding of it, and you know, it might not be appropriate for every sort of circumstance, but it's sort of a general guideline I like to think about for my own composition. Another place to think about it is the bridge section of a lot of pop songs. It normally occurs roughly 5/8 the way through, and that's kind of like a time where things shift, things change a little bit. That's just food for thought, but don't go overboard looking for the Fibonacci sequence where it might not necessarily exist.
Hey Adam, I don't know if someone has asked this before, but is Berkeley worth going to for its musical diversity?
So that is a really nice thing about Berkeley, is that it is very musically diverse, at least when you're comparing it to the other conservatories in the United States. One of the big things that I like about it is that you can go from jazz to rock to pop to Latin salsa to metal. There was actually, when I was there's a lot of metal guitar players who refuse to play any jazz because fuck jazz, we're metal all the way. And that's fine, I guess. Do what you do, guys. There's a great bluegrass Americana old time roots program that was recently started at Berkeley, which as far as I know is probably the only one of its kind at that high sort of conservatory level. The other cool thing about Berkeley is they now mandate that all students have to take a history class in music of the African diaspora, which is very, very important for any sort of musician playing music that has been popular in the past 100 years, because almost all of it is based in some form on rhythmic concepts based from West African music and general sub-Saharan music, and I think that's great that Berkeley is doing that. So those are all big positives of going to Berkeley, and if music diversity is what you want, Berkeley is the place to go.